Good morning, quarantine kiddos. Today, we are going to discuss a little bit more in depth two major European explorers that we've already looked at but haven't really touched on. So, today we are going to explore the lives of Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan. So, let's start with Vasco da Gama. Now, who was Vasco da Gama? Well, there's not a whole lot written about his early life. We know that he was either born in 1468 or 1469 in a town called Sines or Sines, or however you pronounce it in Portuguese, but it was in Portugal. And he's gonna die also in Portugal in 1524. Now, his passion for sailing was fueled by the fact that he had read many journals of the expeditions of two other famous Portuguese sailors, Prince Henry the Navigator and Bartolomeo Diaz. Bartolomeo Diaz is going to be especially important, because he is going to be alive during the time of Vasco da Gama. Now, you have to remember that during this time, Portugal, this little tiny country that hangs off of Spain, is going to be the leading country in the world of exploration, at least in Europe, during this time period. They'd have been out exploring primarily Africa, both the western and the eastern coast of Africa, for a century. Now, the east coast of Africa is going to be primarily important because it's Bartolomeo Diaz who is going to figure out a way to get around Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, and is going to find all of East Africa, and it's going to shape out what Africa looks like.
What a time to be alive.
Now, Vasco da Gama is going to be 28 years old when he makes his first extraordinary voyage in roughly 1497. Only 28 years old. Now, it's going to be important for many reasons. First, he is considered to be the first person to reach India by sea. And this is not an accident like, the voyage of Christopher Columbus, who we're not going to talk a lot about because he's going to make a reappearance in U.S. history where you will have to focus on him quite a bit. Now, another major reason that his voyage is going to be so monumental is he is the first person to fully understand that the earth was round. Now, sidebar, he is not the first person to have this idea. There's many people that have this idea, but he is the first explorer, sailor out there to fully understand that the earth being round.
To me, this is Satan's greatest lie.
You can also use the ocean currents because the earth is round. For more on that, go ahead and zoom message Walker for the currents and why the earth is round has to do with all of that. Blech. So he used those ocean currents to be able to guide his voyages. And that's a big, big deal. Now, he made it as far as a place called Calicut, which is modern day Kazakhstan, India. And from there, he had spent a lot of time traveling through that region before returning to Portugal with just boatloads of peppers and spices and all these other rich resources from his travels. In 1497, his voyage managed to do the following. He was able to prove the earth was round. He was able to benefit from the ocean currents because he understood that the earth was round. And he provided a wealth of goods from Africa and India back to Portugal. But most importantly is this. During this one voyage, he managed to cut off Venice from being the middleman between Europe and India. Venice had controlled all of the wealth because they were the people going to India and returning to Europe with all of these valuable resources. That's how they got all that money that fueled the Renaissance. That comes to an end because of Vasco da Gama's discovery of sailing around Africa to get up the east coast of Africa and eventually to India. So that's a big deal. And it makes Portugal just a boatload of money. So they become very, very wealthy off of this. Okay, that's Vasco da Gama. Now, let's go to another Portuguese sailor who is not going to sail for Portugal. But he is coming out of the whole sailing elite of Portugal. His name, Ferdinand Magellan. Now, we've already talked a little bit about him and we've explored a little bit about him, but we're gonna go just a little bit further in depth. So, what do we know about Magellan? He was born roughly around 1480 in a town called Sabrosa, Portugal. Now, he dies not in Portugal, but he dies in 1541, which we'll get to later. But you should already know. Now, his early success that he gains is that he served as the lead navigator for the Portuguese crown in Asia, and he was there for quite some time during his life. Eventually, he's going to come home, and he's going to want to go out and explore. He sees all of these great explorers, Vasco da Gama included, that are going out there and sailing for Portugal. So what he has is an idea to get to Malaysia, and he's going to go to the Malacca island chain and get these spices. But in it, one of his goals is to sail completely around the world. Now, he brings this idea to the king of Portugal, and what is he going to say?
Nothing for you!
He is distraught that the Portuguese Empire will not fund him. So what does he do? He goes to the neighboring country, Spain, which is dying to get their foot out into the waters further because this is in about 1500s. Spain had already funded Columbus during this time, and he had done a lot to boost their empire. So they want more. So Magellan, they are glad to fund his expedition out there. So his claim to fame, Magellan, is going to be that he gets Spanish approval and he will be the first person to circumnavigate the globe. Sort of. Now, this famous expedition where he circumnavigates the globe was not something that Portugal had funded, but it was funded by the Spanish Empire. Now, what had happened was he set sail in 1519 and he has 5 major ships with over 270 men. And he goes through, we talked about this, he goes through the Atlantic, he then goes around South America, the Cape Horn, he goes around that, and then he gets to the Pacific Ocean. Now, he does name the Pacific Ocean because the Atlantic is this terrible, frightening ocean that rocks ships back and forth. When he gets to the Pacific, it's very peaceful. And that's why Pacific means peaceful. From there, he sets sail and he reaches Malaysia, where in Malaysia, he's going to die in a very misguided battle in which he overestimated his power. But he's going to take an arrow to the neck, a poison arrow, and he's going to die, or at least that's what's chronicled. Now, leading to that, after his death, this guy Juan del Cano is going to take over for him. Juan del Cano is the person who is in charge of chronicling this entire expedition of Magellan. Now, he's not a captain, nor is he really that familiar with sailing other than he's been on a boat and he's watched it all happen, and he's been on many sailors' boats and he's chronicled many expeditions. He's familiar with the sea, but he's no captain. But he continues the voyage because he wants to get home. So what he does is he takes this voyage and he manages somehow to go around Africa and make it back to Spain. This takes about 3 years, and in 1522 he gets back there. Now, not being a captain, all that's left are very, very few resources that they picked up along the way and 20 starving men. From that point, at least he had made it back. Now, what does this all mean? The question becomes, who was the first person to sail around the world? History looked kindly upon Ferdinand Magellan. He hired Del Cano to chronicle this whole thing. Therefore, when that was published to the community, they said, Magellan's expedition is the one that did it, even though he didn't necessarily make it. So who was the first person, really? Could it be, as many historians have also argued, Del Cano himself, because he managed to take he was on the original expedition and managed to get everybody back to Spain? Or what about the other 20 starving men that managed to make it as well, including Enrique? Enrique was Magellan's Malaysian slave who was on the voyage as well and went from start to finish, and then eventually went back to Malaysia after Magellan's death anyway to live out his life. The point of all of this is to remember this quote that I really like. Now, it's accredited to Winston Churchill, but nobody really knows if that's who said it originally. But it says this: history is written by the victors, which means if you do something and you win at it, or you happen to do it first, or you put out a book faster than somebody else that might have done it first, but your book comes out faster, you can claim that you did it first. And if history looks kindly upon you, then it's yours. The point being, facts aren't necessarily what drives history when you read them. That is why history is part of the social studies, which you need to start looking at in everyday life. There are so many interpretations of things, so don't get grounded on one idea just because somebody told you it was so. The social studies are up for your personal interpretation. So, now you go over to Canvas, and there will be an assignment, both about Vasco da Gama and about Ferdinand Magellan. Go in there, make sure you complete them, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. One love.